They tried to steal my farm. They forgot who controls their water. The calm before the storm. The sun was just beginning to rise over my family's land. The sky was painted in soft hues of orange and pink, and a light breeze rustled the tops of the crops. It was a perfect morning to plant. Just like every year, I was out there before dawn, driving my old John Deere tractor through the soil, preparing for a new season. I felt the kind of peace that only comes from working the same land your ancestors once did. My name is Daniel Walker. My family has owned this land for over a century. My grandfather tilled this same soil, and my father raised cattle on these pastures. We've weathered droughts, floods, market crashes, you name it. But I never thought I'd have to defend our farm from something like this. As I steered the tractor along the southern fields, my phone started buzzing. At first, I ignored it. A man has to focus when he's working a machine like this. But after the 10th buzz in less than 5 minutes, I knew something was wrong. I parked the tractor at the edge of the field and checked my phone. 10 missed calls from neighbors. 3 voicemails from my cousin, Jack. And 1 email that made my stomach drop. It was from the Oak Hill Reserve Homeowners Association. The subject line read, "Violation notice. Immediate action required." I took a deep breath, wiped the dirt from my hands, and opened the message. The HOA makes its move. They accused me of violating their community standards. According to the email, the sound of my tractor was disrupting the peaceful enjoyment of nearby homes. They also claimed that my chicken coops produced offensive odors that affected property values. Their conclusion? I had 48 hours to cease all agricultural operations, or they'd fine me $250 per day until I complied. I laughed out loud, sitting there on the tailgate of my truck. They had no jurisdiction over my land. Oak Hill Reserve HOA governed the subdivision a few miles east of my property. My farm wasn't part of their neighborhood. Never had been. We weren't even on the same zoning map. But the laugh didn't last long. Something about this felt calculated. The next morning, I was in my barn working on the irrigation system when I heard a car door slam. I stepped outside and saw a white SUV parked in front of my house. 3 people were marching across my lawn like they owned the place. A woman in a tailored white pantsuit, clipboard in hand, led the group. She walked up to me with the confidence of someone who thought she was about to take something that didn't belong to her. "Mr. Walker," she said, "I'm Denise Morgan, president of the Oak Hill Reserve Homeowners Association. We need to have a conversation about your violations." I crossed my arms. "I don't believe we do," I replied. "You don't have any authority over my property." Denise smiled tightly. "Actually, according to the county zoning board, your agricultural exemption expired last year. That means your property now falls under our jurisdiction." I stared at her. My family had farmed this land for 112 years. Our agricultural exemption had never lapsed. I paid our taxes on time every year. "We have standards, Mr. Walker," Denise added, handing me a cease and desist letter. "Times change." With that, they turned and left, leaving me standing there in the dust with a piece of paper that made my blood boil. The truth comes to light. I called Jack that night. He's not just my cousin. He's on the town council and knows just about everything that goes on in Oak Hill. He confirmed what I already suspected. "They've been planning this for months," Jack said. "Denise has been having private meetings with developers. She's changing HOA meeting minutes after the fact to cover her tracks. She's got big plans for that land of yours." I spent the rest of the night digging through county records. Sure enough, my agricultural exemption was still valid. Good for another 5 years. Denise had lied. Flat out. For the next week, I ignored the letters and fines they kept sending. Then came the noise complaints. Sheriff Mike Douglas, an old buddy from high school, paid me a visit one afternoon. "Dan," Mike said, looking uncomfortable, "they're filing complaints every single day. They've started a petition to classify your farm as a public nuisance." I shook my head. "Mike, my family has fed this county for generations. What's really going on?" Mike sighed. "They're trying to push through a massive development project, and your land's in the middle of it." Later that day, I saw men in suits walking along my eastern fields, taking pictures and measuring distances. I climbed in my truck and drove straight toward them. The shocking discovery. "Can I help you?" I called as I pulled up. A tall man in a charcoal suit turned around. "I'm Evan Brooks with Silverstone Development. We're surveying for the new residential project." I blinked. "This is my land." Evan checked his clipboard. According to our records, Silverstone purchased 1,700 acres from Oak Hill Reserve HOA 3 weeks ago. Construction begins next month. My stomach dropped. I never sold my land. I demanded to see the paperwork. He showed me. Official documents. Survey maps with county stamps. A signature that looked exactly like mine. But I never signed anything. I raced home, pulled out my property deeds from the safe, and drove to the county recorder's office the next morning. The clerk pulled up the records. According to our files, he said, 1,700 acres were transferred to the Oak Hill Reserve Community Trust 6 weeks ago. You currently own 320 acres. I was stunned. That's impossible. I never signed anything. The clerk shrugged. Sir, the documents are here. They have your signature. When I got home and opened the emailed documents, my hands shook. It was my name. My signature. Perfectly forged. And there, parked at the edge of my property, was Denise Morgan, sitting in her Lexus SUV, sunglasses on, smiling as she watched me through the windshield. She waved. The water play. I had less than 30 days before the bulldozers arrived. And that's when I remembered. In 1943, my grandfather had signed an agreement with the county to build a reservoir on our land. That reservoir supplied water to the entire community, including Oak Hill Reserve. But there was a catch. Agricultural use took priority. I still controlled the main water valve. I made 3 calls. One to my lawyer, one to the local newspaper, and one to the state water authority. 2 days later, Oak Hill Reserve woke up with no running water. The tide turns. Denise called me 17 times before I answered. What did you do? She screamed. I calmly buttered my toast. Nothing illegal, I said. I just prioritized my farm's water needs. Per the original agreement. By sunset, Oak Hill Reserve was in chaos. Residents were furious. Developers were threatening lawsuits. The county launched an investigation into fraud. A week later, I stood in the courthouse as a judge ruled in my favor. My land was returned. Denise was removed from the HOA board. The developers backed out. Oak Hill Reserve rewrote its bylaws to protect local farms permanently. That night, I walked the perimeter of my fields, listening to the sounds of my livestock and the wind through the trees. They had tried to steal my farm. Instead, they reminded everyone why it mattered. Aftermath, the HOA's revenge attempt. I thought the battle was over. I was wrong. After Denise was ousted, Oak Hill Reserve elected a new president, Mark Simmons, a retired lawyer who was far more calculating than Denise ever was. The HOA's new strategy. Mark's first move was to petition the county to reclassify my farm's access road as a private street. If he succeeded, I wouldn't be able to reach half my land. Jack gave me the heads up. He thinks if he controls your road, he controls your farm, he warned. I drove straight to the zoning office with a copy of my grandfather's right-of-way agreement. It had been on record for 70 years. The zoning officer chuckled. They can file all they want, he said. This road's legally protected. Strike 1. False environmental complaints. Next, they tried environmental complaints. Claims of illegal pesticides. Livestock waste contaminating groundwater. I saw where this was going. I called Lisa Moreno, the state agricultural inspector, and an old family friend. She inspected every inch of my farm. Her report? Full compliance. 0 violations. Then she called Mark Simmons directly. Filing false reports could lead to felony charges, she warned. Strike 2. The final power move. Their last trick was a cease and desist letter. They claimed my farm violated community aesthetics under a new HOA rule. I laughed. Then I filed a lawsuit for harassment and interference with my business. I contacted local reporters. I requested a formal state audit of Oak Hill Reserve's finances. Within weeks, the board was in shambles. Mark Simmons resigned. The audit revealed $75,000 in misappropriated funds. Board members were held personally liable. And 6 months later, Oak Hill Reserve HOA was dissolved. The sweet taste of victory. I stood by my fields one last time, watching county workers take down the Oak Hill Reserve HOA signs. They had tried everything to take my land, to break me. In the end, they destroyed themselves. And I'm still here, on my land, where I belong.